are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. I am your host, Robert Phoenix, and we are broadcasting to you live from a secret location, our deep underground military bunker, waiting for the end of the world to happen on August 14th, as might be prophesied by the dire and ominous warnings of the Georgia Guidestones. I'm going to get into that a little bit later in the show. We're only going to do about a 60-minute show today. It's going to be a blitz. It's going to be fast. I'm going to come at you with a lot of fact, some feeling, put it together. Hopefully it'll be enlightening and entertaining for you to disseminate. How is everyone today? We are living, of course, in very strange times. And the mark of the strangeness and the diverse, how do I say this? The range of strange can be seen in the comments of on my blog or on my radio show. They're fascinating. I had a comment come in from the last post that I did, which was fairly well received, had to do with Pluto and the 12th house and what that entails and how it impacts people, excuse me, in terms of their inner life, the dark events that almost always surround that Pluto 12th house planetary experience, and the deep and potent transcendence of pain and suffering as a portal to some greater and imminent reality, because that's how Pluto in the 12th house works. So the post was pretty well received. The radio show kind of accompanied it, pretty well received too, I thought. And I get this comment on my website, and it's a woman whose name I will not mention on the air, even though she's probably not listening. And she basically says that she's lost all respect for me, that she's followed me on Gaia and has lost all respect for me because of my position on Donald Trump and what he stands for. So here's where we're at with a lot of this. Let me be clear about my position on Trump. If I've not made it valuably and articulately clear up until this point, let's get it on the public record. I don't trust Donald Trump. And if you're somebody who's doing deals with him at any level, even the guys who are the puppet masters, I would not trust him either. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, do you trust Hilary Clinton? Do you trust Ted Cruz? Do you trust John Kasich? At this point, do you even trust Bernie Sanders? So this whole notion of trust and the highest levels of public service just has to be it has to be ejected. You have to hit the eject button. We're at an all-time low in trust. But there's a different level of what I mean by trust. Because we know, essentially, what Hilary is going to do. We know, essentially, what one of these other clowns from the Republican Party would do, especially Ted Cruz. He would have been a neocon lackey. By the way, Hilary is now a neocon lackey. All the neocons have left. They have migrated to a new host, the parasitical force that attached itself to the Reagan Republicans for 8 years and then took off during those next 8 years to Brookings and AEI and GINSA and all those other think tanks, running on Koch brothers money, running on Soros money, whoever was funding these guys, these characters. And they're back. They're back. They came back with young Bush, but now they're back again. And they don't trust Trump. Who do they trust? They trust Hillary Clinton. Most people who are, and by the way, I had a really interesting experience on a plane flight recently. And there was a woman who was sitting next to me on the plane, and we didn't talk the entire time. She had her headphones on, and she had her face buried in a People magazine or, one of the modern tabloids, us, them, we. And as we were getting ready to land, she, was putting everything together, putting everything sort of away, and took the headphones off. And I made a joke, and I said, "Do you think Ben and Jennifer are going to be able to work this out?" And she laughed. And then we got around to the topic of politics. I don't know how we got there. We got there eventually. Most people do. And we talked about, here's how it went. She was coming to going to a convention, a conference, a medical conference. So we started to talk about medicine and health and all the things that go along with it. And so I asked her, I said, because she was in the health industry, as it's called now, the health industry. And I asked her if she had seen pictures or a video of Hillary Clinton and her health crisis. And she said, no. I don't watch much TV. In fact, we don't watch really any TV at all. And I'm a mom. I've got 2 girls, and I work full time. Nice woman. She was Asian. And I said, oh, well, there's some very disturbing and alarming video and stills of her really struggling health-wise. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then we talked about Hillary as a candidate, and without coming right on saying she's going to vote for her, she basically said she would vote for her. And I asked her, well, why would you be inclined to vote for her? So, well, because she's a woman. First thing she said, because she's a woman. Second thing is because she's a Democrat. And then she, again, confessed that she just doesn't have any time to keep up on things. This is where America's at. This is where we are. We've got people that are working full time. They've got kids full time. They do not have the bandwidth to go in and do what myself or other people who are maybe not that engaged at that level of their lives. We take other parts of our lives to dedicate it to it and put it out there and to break this stuff down. So she went with the defaults. Society is based on defaults. It is not often based on choice. And a default is a choice to not choose. That's all it is. She was defaulting to the gender issue, and she was defaulting to the brand. She had no idea where Hillary stood on anything like the TTIP. TTIP, what's the TTIP? No knowledge. None whatsoever. WikiLeaks, email scandals, nope. Headphones on, facing People magazine. This is where we are. This is the state of things in the United States, August 12th, circa 2016. This is one of the reasons why we're in such dire straits. Now, that said, what's been happening over the last 3 months is extraordinary. It's revelatory. We're seeing that, and this is, look, there are those of us who have known this for years about the corruption, about the game playing, the rigging, as it's now commonly known. We've known about it for years. And so here it comes. They're just, you know what they're doing? They're just pulling everything back. It's like if you're watching a really great movie or a really great play and you're really immersed in the play, like you're so bought in, and then all of a sudden they start moving parts of the set and the scenery away, piece by piece by piece by piece, until all of a sudden there's nothing left. And all you have up there are people in costumes, and everything around them is naked. It's scaffolding, it's lighting, it's sandbags. And this is what's happening. And we're seeing everybody up there in their costumes, but there's no set. There's nothing that is contextualizing the costumery anymore. That's what's taking place. So some people will say, oh, well, who cares? There's a friend of mine on Facebook, one of my students, every time I post something now, who cares? Doesn't matter anyway. You know, we've all known that, you know, so it's a default. That's another form of default. It's a different kind of default. But it's the same mechanism that the person next to me on the plane was using. It's just a different polarity. So the answer to the question is, does it matter? Well, of course it matters. But it matters if you contextualize it in a way that you understand it, which I'll get into. But getting back to this person, I don't trust Donald Trump. And that's one of the reasons why I think whether he's electable or not, whether it's a big fucking, pardon me, I shouldn't use that word, whether it's just a big scam, whether it's just a big production to get all these people all worked up and frothed up so that we have bifurcation and polarity and duality and more strife and more racial division. Perhaps that's what it is. Perhaps that's what it is. The jaded part of me says perhaps that's what it is. The jaded part of me says, well, Hilary will win despite the fact that she's got something really abnormal in her brain and that she's breaking down and malfunctioning at an alarming rate. A jaded part of me says it doesn't really matter because of September 28th, the Strong Cities Act that the UN in conjunction with the Obama administration is going to kick in. And there's a strong chance that the leering, grinning, lame duck president who's doing everything in his power to be more presidential than he's ever been in the last 8 years is going to rig the game, and he's going to stay in power, and we're going to be dealing with a proxy government through the UN Small Cities Initiative. Boom. We don't know at this point. And if you think you do, if you think you really know at this point, then just shoot me some lottery numbers, okay? Because everything right now is so fluid. There are so many dynamics in play from an astrological perspective, and I've talked about this before. We've got Saturn in Sagittarius, Jupiter in Virgo. We've got Neptune in Pisces, mutable, mutable, mutable. Changeable, changeable, changeable. We've got Pluto in Capricorn, Uranus in Aries, Cardinal. Everybody and their sister and brother in Uranus and Aries has a bone to pick right now. The radical expression of the individual, whether it's black or white or brown or pink or rainbow, everybody's getting radicalized. This is what's happening with Uranus and Aries. We're all getting radicalized in our own sort of version of what that means. And what that means is that people are tired of being put into a box. They're being tired of persecuted. They're being tired of played. They're being tired of being lied to. This is it. This is a major phase cycle of revolt. And we're coming back in to another Pluto-Uranus square coming up. It's going to be a biggie. And we have Pluto in Capricorn, and Pluto in Capricorn wants to maintain the hegemonic control of everything. And I mean everything, from your thoughts to what you eat, to not only what you drive, but what drives you, okay? This is the top-down model of complete control that is being created right before our very eyes. You have no idea where all this is going. No idea. Everything from when you wake up in the morning to when you get into your car will be a mediated reality. We're about 80% there. So that mediated reality also has systems of control for governance. It's all sort of interlocking into one complete functional grid. And that grid, of course, will be completely digital, completely virtual, and completely trackable. The piece has been put in place. It's coming. But what we need disruption. And the power of disruption sometimes is not predictable. That's the nature of disruption. If you could predict it, it wouldn't be disruptive now, would it? Sometimes you can. Sometimes we can see trends. Sometimes we can see patterns. Sometimes we can use things like astrology and put it together and put it to use, which we can and have done. But other times, and now particularly, it's getting very hard to predict. Very, very hard. So my position on Trump is I don't trust him. I think he's got a lot of dirt in his closet, maybe not as much as Hilary and Bill and the Clinton Foundation, which, by the way, is really going to be in the crosshairs here over the next couple of weeks. There's never been more attention paid to the Clinton Foundation, which is, they did this in Arkansas, by the way. They set up an arm of the government, the state government in Arkansas. I forget the name. It's one of the first things they did. Basically, it was like a slush fund. And they would have their contributors, what they would do is they would get state dollars that were earmarked for special projects. So they get taxpayer money earmarked for special projects, and they would take that money and they would distribute it to their friends and their cronies, and their friends and cronies would pay. They would pay to get this money to the Rose Law Firm. So Hilary and the Rose Law Firm was making upwards of $150,000 for these applications. And then if they passed, and they almost always did, they would get more money from the state. So the Clintons are making personal money, and their pals are getting extremely low interest loans through the taxpayers, or from the taxpayers of the state of Arkansas, through this agency that they'd set up. And then what they would do with that money, well, you have Don Tyson, who set up his chicken farm, Tyson Chicken, underneath the Clintons. Now Tyson Chicken is in China because, of course, the Clintons did everything in their power to sell as much influence, sell as much information, sell as much property, whatever it was to the Chinese during Bill's reign as president. They were game and they were going to do it. The Chinese were the highest bidders, and the Clintons were more than willing to sell off anything from the Panama Canal to most favored nation rights in terms of China as a trading partner, which allowed them to claim a monopoly on things you can't even begin to know about, like apples and apple juice. Most of your apple juice comes from China. I bet you didn't know that. The apple juice that you lovingly feed your kids, if it's not organic, very good chance it comes from China. Look it up. So now we have Smithfield, the largest producer of pork, I believe, in this country. I think they outproduce Hormel now, owned by the Chinese. Now, I don't want to sound like Alex Jones here. This is not what this is, but I'm just giving you a sense as to what the Clintons did. Anyway, they did this thing. They had the Clinton Foundation back when they were in Arkansas, but it was an umbrella. It was part of the state government. Now, another person who made a lot of money or a lot of goodies out of this was Webster Hubbell's father. Webster Hubbell, of course, was in the Clinton administration, and there are many people out there who believe that he is the father of Chelsea. It looks a lot like him. Webster Hubbell's father had a company that retrofitted airplanes. Oh, sounds like a nice company, retrofitting airplanes. What did he do with the airplanes? Well, he hollowed them out. He made your basic airplane kind of a big, flying, moving truck in the sky. And where would these airplanes go? These airplanes would go to Central America. And what were these airplanes carrying when they went to Central America? Well, these airplanes were carrying guns and bullets and rocket launchers. And what would these planes be carrying back from Panama? Oh, we'll think called cocaine. So this is how the machine works. It's on if you dig deep enough, you'll find it. Clinton Foundation is just an extension of what they did in Arkansas. And now they're in the crosshairs. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. We are in absolutely revelatory times. It's a kind of an amazing time to be awake, to be here on planet Earth, to understand in this domain, this third dimensional representation, this holographic expression through the mind of God, perhaps hijacked along the way. Now, you're here for this. Now, it was, maybe better in 1970 with 15% interest rates. But I don't know. This is it. You're on the front lines of probably the most dramatic spot in the holographic universe. It's right here. You're part of it. You're a witness to it. And we are playing for big stakes right now. Now, as I mentioned and try to work this back into the Trump piece, I don't trust Donald Trump. Does he appear presidential? No, he doesn't appear presidential. Not at all. But there are some people who appear presidential who are complete and utter sociopaths. Obama appears incredibly presidential. He's tall, he's regal, he's got the high cheekbones, he presents a certain gravitas, he's articulate. I mean, check the box, check the box, check the box, and look what he's done. He's got more deaths in foreign wars on his hands than Bush did. More. And there's more racial division and strife and agitation in the country now than there was 8 years ago. And I'm not a Bush fan. Please, I have to reiterate my position on these things. I couldn't stand Bush. I couldn't stand looking at him. I couldn't stand listening to him. I couldn't stand the politics. I couldn't stand the smarmy, good old boy, neocon, let's rip everybody off mentality. Couldn't stand it. But I have equal parts antipathy for both. Look, the one thing I'm going to say about Trump is that if he is clear and if he is telling the truth on this TTIP piece and that he will not rubber stamp it, and you can't trust a politician anyway, right? Because Hillary Clinton says that she's not for TTIP, and I guarantee you she is. And she, or whoever is pulling her strings, will rubber stamp that thing. That is the last brick in the wall, boys and girls. That thing gets approved, and we are now fully cemented into the global matrix of domination and control from an economic. We give away our sovereignty. It's in there. It is the last link to whatever sovereignty we have. And some of you may not care. Fine, sovereignty, what's it mean? What's it matter? I'll just put my headphones on, and I'll read People magazine, and I'll hit default. Do I want a better quote-unquote system for life on this planet, this matrix, this hologram? Of course I do. Is what we're dealing with perfect? Of course it's not. In my world, I would love less top-down governance, more local, more state, more bio-regional relationships with people, their choices, their land, whatever it is. Let's return some of the power to the people, as it is supposed to be. Do we need a federal government for certain things? Of course we do. Ask anybody that does trucking. There are different trucking rules and trucking regulations from state to state to state. And if you're bringing stuff across different states, you've got to have 4 or 5 or 6 different kinds of, codes that you've got to follow. This is where, a one-size-fits-all, top-down sort of path is actually fitting, because you've got to move commerce from state to state to state uninterrupted. If you are running a truck through, say, Idaho, and you're trying to get to Washington, and Idaho has some really arcane rules around shipping and freight, and you've got something that's not quite Idaho spec, what are you going to do? You're going to go around Idaho. Or are you going to risk paying a fine or a fee or something like that? See, this is where some, federal mandated rules are actually workable. They're not bad. But we also have to have more bioregional representation for people that live in areas and make choices based on the consensus, or really the rural, the voice of the people in that area. That's what I'm for. I am for organic, all the way, organic, less corporate, more organic, more choice, more craft, more artisanal, and then everything across the board for our food, for our children, returning the sense that we actually have a say in how we can govern our lives. From the media we consume, to the food we eat, to the choices we make. And if some of those choices are different than other people, then that's the way it is. And then we either dialogue about it, or we agree to disagree, and we move on. And if you don't like that, then you go somewhere else. Or perhaps there are other people that are like-minded. People are leaving California. 1 out of 3 people are leaving California, especially the Bay Area. Why? Well, number one, it's too expensive. And number two, they're realizing that the type of life that they want or had envisioned or grew up with, whether you like it or not, or agree with it or not, is not what's taking place there now. That the governance, the culture, they're not in agreement with it. So what are they doing? They're moving. They're moving. We have this thing, it's called choice, and we can choose to live in certain places even if we've grown up there. We don't necessarily have to stay there. It'd be great if we could. I grew up in California. It was fantastic. Loved it. By the time I was in my 50s, I was ready to leave. The regulations were off the charts, and most people were not really willing to have an alternative position other than the ones that they think that they were so blessed and enlightened with. And so I was done with that. Trump is somebody who I think has the potential to throw a monkey wrench into the global system. What we need is time. We need time. We are waking up. Everybody's waking up. The Democratic progressive mindset is waking up. We saw it with Sanders. The problem with the Sanders meme is that Bernie just does not have any balls. He's an old man with no balls. He talked a good game. He was a nice little bulldog nipping at Hillary's heels, and he actually won the majority of those primaries. In a truly democratic society, Bernie Sanders is the guy running against Donald Trump. It didn't happen. It was hijacked, and those people woke up. The awakening process was taking place already, but to see it in such stark terms, they woke up. even on the Trump side, hate Trump, hate what he stands for. But there are people that are waking up. They're finally waking up. They're looking around. They're seeing how they're being manipulated. They're seeing how their culture, or culture in general, is being hijacked by a top-down series of decisions, and they don't like it. They don't like it. Let me give you an example of how this stuff works. I was watching a movie with an English actor by the name of Sean Bean, B-E-A-N. And I forget the name of this movie. It came out, I think, in 2014, and it's an English movie. And something about skin, like hard skin, edge skin, I don't know. If I was really into the movie, I would have remembered the name. The movie goes like this. He plays a ex-MI5, MI6 guy who fought in the Middle East, and he was basically kicked out of MI6 because he screwed up, but then he was picked up by a secret group, and the secret group is this group that is running a kind of counter-terrorist program against the Islamic State, or these cells that are popping up, right? So there's this character named Ash. He goes to college. He's a young guy. He's a firebrand. He's Muslim. He's got a Western girlfriend. She drinks, takes drugs. Everything that they portray about Western culture is about decay and demoralization, or being demoralized. No morals. So Ash has the moral ground, the moral high ground in this movie. And so what you begin to do is you begin to identify with his own personal jihad. And of course, it makes it clear they've been screwed over. You know, their Western handlers, the NGOs, all the way going back to the Dutch East India Trading Company, which would go in with imperialistic intent and basically screw these cultures over. This is what is being portrayed in this movie. And anybody who's got any sense of righteousness and fairness sees it and says, of course they've been screwed over. Now they're done. Uranus and Aries, right? They're going to hit back, just like everybody else is doing. But as a viewer, you identify with Ash and the moral struggle, to the point where maybe the terrorism might be slightly justifiable. And then they contrast this with the Sean Bean character, who is so morally bankrupt, so filled with rage, so filled with a one-pointed goal and desire to eradicate the deadly and random threat that terrorism is, that he does things that cross lines that make him appear inhuman, a demon, by any means necessary. And so this is a classic trope, by the way, that they use in movies. Shakespeare did this all the time. At the beginning of a Shakespeare play, he would present you with two characters that you could identify with, one in the negative and one in the positive, but they'd be set in different casts. Because what happens then is that splits you, and it renders an opening inside of your psyche. So you're like, oh, I really should be identifying with the British guy who's trying to protect people, but he's inhumane, he's barbaric, he has no conscience. What I'm really identifying with is the guy who's like doing these things, but he's got the moral high ground. You see, this works. This is an age-old theme. It splits you. And to some extent, we're even seeing that in politics with Hilary and with Trump. They're playing the same roles to some extent. But what they were doing in the movie is they were essentially massaging people's heads around the fact that there is some level of moral justification when it comes to the potential terror threats, especially if you're in England or in Europe. Because the majority of the Caucasian population is raised in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and whether you have it first generation, second generation, third generation, it's inside of you. And so there are these kind of moral presets, right? Compassion, turn the other cheek. And a lot of what we're seeing with the refugee or the immigrants, whatever we want to call it, it is played upon those feelings and those sentiments. We've got to do this. This is what the Pope is in there for, right? Oh, please, we've got to do this. This is our background, it's our traditions, who we are. Well, just gaming the system. Everybody's gaming the system. So Trump, don't trust him, but if there's anything that he can push a button on, it's no to the TTIP. Now, I have my reservations. He basically became a very, very influential member of the United States Football League. This is really interesting. I never thought of this parallel before, but now I'm thinking about it now. There's a 30 for 30 documentary on ESPN, and it's about the USFL. And the USFL was a competitor to the National Football League, and this took place in the 1980s. And it was actually a pretty exciting old football league. They had some really good players that played during the summertime. And their economic model was to, basically, spend within an affordable kind of structured budget and continue to play and build out football in the summertime in places like Memphis, San Antonio, Oakland, Portland. These are B cities that had teams. And there were some A cities too. One of the A cities was New York. And the team in New York was called the Generals. And the eventual owner of the team was Donald Trump. So Trump owned a football team. And he filled it with star-studded players. And at that time, there were two factions inside the USFL. One was John Bassett. And John Bassett was the guy who pretty much helped found the USFL. And he was the owner of the Memphis, I forget the name of the team. It's a Memphis football team, the Tigers, the Memphis Showboats, I forget, but it was the Memphis team. And he was the owner of that team, and he was beloved. He was a buddy of Burt Reynolds. Everybody says that John Bassett was just an absolute great guy. His rival was Donald Trump. And Trump did exactly the same thing with Bassett that he did with everybody else he's run against. There's a level of denigration and running down that Trump is very, very good at. John Bassett winds up having brain cancer. Does that sound familiar? I just realized that there's this very strange similarity between what happened with John Bassett and really, for all intents and purposes, what's happening with Hillary Clinton. John Bassett winds up dying during the season. I believe it was the second season of the USFL. And once John Bassett was gone, all the opposition to Trump vanished. And Trump basically became the lead owner and czar of the USFL, even though I believe the commissioner was Chet Forte, who'd been an executive at ABC. Chet Forte helped the USFL get a contract, a football contract to be seen on Saturdays. They played on Saturdays. So now Trump decides that, this is amateur stuff, this summer stuff. We want to play in the fall. We want to take the NFL on. And that was the worst thing that they could have done. The NFL is super powerful. And what they were really trying to do was they were trying to force a merger, just like the AFL did. That was the model. Force the merger. Get in where the big money is. And Trump made a lot of really bad decisions and forced owners to make bad decisions. And a little over 3 years later, the league was done. It was about a 3.5-year league. It was done. And much of it had to do with the fact that Donald Trump had assumed control of the league and fast-tracked it into oblivion. Now, there are people that think that Donald Trump did this because he was in the pocket of the NFL, and that it was in the NFL's best interest to eliminate its competition. And I have to say that, the guys that did the movie, they're great. They were the guys that were actually doing the broadcasts of the USFL back when it was playing or being played. And so they come back and they do this movie, and Trump, of course, remembers them. And, Trump is really a dismissive asshole by the end of the movie, by the end of the documentary. So this is what you get with Trump. Now, what we need is time. We need time. We know Hilary will fast-track this thing. We know Obama will fast-track this thing. If Hilary is elected, there's a very good chance that we'll go deeper and deeper and deeper into Syria, the war with Syria, potentially conflict with Russia. Taxes will be raised. That TTIP will be signed, sealed, delivered. They did NAFTA. NAFTA was on their watch. They're huge globalists. Our time evaporates very quickly. If Trump has the potential, even the most remote potential, of being a wild card, and he could throw a monkey wrench in this, it buys us time. But what we can't do is we can't look to him and say, this guy's going to solve all of our problems. No, it's not the case at all. We have to take accountability, responsibility, and we have to continue to craft our lives in a way that's meaningful. And it's not business as usual. We've got to, it's like every time this year, for the last, 10 years of my life, fantasy football. I play fantasy football. It's like, for me, it's like a diversion. I'm not going to play fantasy football this year. I'm not interested. I don't have the time for fantasy football. The time for fantasy football is over. Whatever those things are that we've done in order to distract ourselves, it's over. So by no stretch am I supporting Donald Trump in his trumpet, his Trumpisms. What I do support is I support the fact that in that chart, there is that Uranus-Sun conjunction with the true node in Gemini, and that this thing can somehow flip in a way that can be, they talk about creative chaos. Creative chaos. It's a great term, isn't it? Creative chaos. Ordo ab chao. Well, real creative chaos is natural. It is not manufactured. It's natural. It happens. So perhaps there is true chaos that can come through his chart that buys us some more time, and we continue to wake up and we continue to move on this path, which ultimately is not segregational. It is unified. Unified. Speaking of segregational, and I'm going to get into this Georgia Guidestones thing here in a second, because we have about 20 minutes left. I was watching, I was supposed to have Henrik of Red Ice Radio on my show a long time ago, Henrik Palmgren, and he didn't come on my show. And as many of you know, Henrik has alienated a great deal of people by his by modifying or adjusting, mutating, whatever you want to call it, his content, his programming, and taking a stance that's clearly defined. Now, I respect Henrik for that. You may not like his stance. You may not agree with it, but it's his right to do that, and I respect him for doing that. And I agree with some of the things that Henrik says. I don't agree with everything. And yet, I was watching this compilation of stuff on the alt-right. There's this new movement called the alt-right, which is slightly bizarre, if you ask me. I'll do a show on the alt-right. Maybe I'll do it next week. I don't want to get into it. We don't have a lot of time. But I was watching this compilation video of people that are on the alt-right. And there's Henrik. And I don't know who this woman is, this blonde-haired American woman. Is that his girlfriend? I don't know who she is. But it's fascinating. It seems to me like she has taken over Henrik. Like she has become Henrik. And Henrik is now the engineer to her experience. because I was watching some stuff, and she's clearly moved to the center of Henrik's universe. So the things that maybe Henrik talks about, in terms of maybe male-female relations and Hakim and all that stuff, it was just a notice. That's all. Just a notice. Okay, with the time that we have left here, I want to talk about this Georgia Guidestones piece. There's a website called The Daily Crow, and it's a very long, very extended piece, and I want to bring it to your attention. It's kind of a must-read, and I'm going to read some of it here. It's the Georgia Guidestones Cube, August 14th, 2016, Tisha B'Av. So it says here, the Georgia Guidestones can be best described as the Ten Commandments of the New World Order. The monument was constructed on March 22nd, 1980, after a granite company was hired by an individual who went by the pseudonym of R.C. Christian. By the way, the rumor is that R.C. Christian is Ted Turner. These objects have long been the subject of conspiracy theorists, and rightly so. It says, when we deal with specific dates, it's important to note that this does not mean any particular event must take place on this day. There's an asterisk. Since 8/14/16 is the date written on the cube that was removed. Remember that cube that was removed and then was put back in, that keystone? Since 8/14/16 is the date written on the cube that was removed. That makes 2016 the 36th year since it was erected. So the Georgia Guidestones, 36 years from 8/14/16, 36 is 666. It literally reads 36 or 3 times 6 equals 18, or 6 plus 6 plus 6. All integers from 1 to 36, when added together, equal 666. The monument was unveiled on 3/22/80, or March 22nd, where 36 days to the year would be the Brussels-Belgian bombings. The 36 years between the Georgia Guidestones and Brussels was 13,150 days inclusive. 777 days prior to Tisha B'Av, this is this date, this August 14th date. 2016 was June 29th, 2014. According to Wikipedia, this is the day the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant self-described, self-declared its caliphates in Syria and northern Iraq. Okay, 777 days prior to Tisha B'Av on 2016, June 29, 2014, ISIS was created. At the very least, any thinking person should ask some basic questions. If you have studied the Illuminati, those Illuminatis, you know they operate by a certain code. You can say that they have decorum as they believe. They fulfill moral necessity by revealing their intentions in plain sight. They have to tell you. They have to tell you it's happening. Because they tell you it's happening, and you don't do anything about it, what are you doing? You're consenting. You're giving your consent. Happens all the time. To make things even more creepy, I will mention that from an overhead view, it appears to be an altar. This is the Georgia Guidestones, to be an altar. So if you get on top of the Georgia Guidestones, you'll see that this thing looks like an altar, and that there's an unmistakable blood stain on the altar. How about that? So there's all the commandments that the Georgia Guidestones has. So on 25 September 2014, a cube was removed from the top of the Georgia Guidestones. Once it was taken out, we were able to see what was inscribed on it, and speculation followed. On 4 sides were numbers 8, 14, 16, and the letters MM, which is believed to mean Master Mason, and JAM, which stands for Judgment Against Mankind. Since symbols, dates, numbers, names, etc., all have deep meaning in occult practices, I believe it's worth looking into. And this is where I came upon a startling discovery. Now, this is not my work. Go to the Daily Crow, look up the Georgia Guidestones piece, and your mind is going to be blown. So Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av, the unmistakable day, unmistakable meaning of this day. For the last few years, I've been studying patterns in Jewish history based on the Hebrew calendar. There are certain days that have great significance to the Jewish people, and there is none more ominous than the 9th of Av, or Tisha B'Av. On this day, both Jewish temples were destroyed, the first in 423 BC and the second in 70 AD. On the 9th of Av, 135 AD, 500,000 Jewish people, the number might be a little inflated, were slaughtered by Roman soldiers in the city of Batar. Here are some horrendous historical events which took place on or around this date, some of which I will read, some of which I will not read, because some of it is disinformation. We have on the 18th of July of 9, the Jews were, this is at 1290, Jews were expelled from England. July 22nd, they were expelled from France. That was off 10 a.m. 566. July 31st, 1492. There's that interesting date. They were kicked out of Spain. And then we have Germany enters World War I. Some of these events, I believe, need to be looked at through a different lens and filter. Some of the ones I just read you are historically correct. We have the First Crusade taking place on the 15th of August, 1096. There were 10,000 Jews killed in the first month, destroying Jewish communities in France, the Rhinelands. 1.2 were killed in the Crusade on the 9th of Av. So what the Cube is saying here is that something big is going to happen on the 14th of August, which includes the Kaaba, which is the holder of what is supposedly the Chintamani stone, and the magnetic resonating force of Saturn, the L, here on planet Earth. The cube of Saturn. The cult of Saturn gathers once a year on Ramadan in Mecca to celebrate Saturn's influence of hell on Earth. This is a pretty interesting article. And there are a number of other coincidences that are being added to this. This is the beauty of the internet. Now, part of this is, I think, in a lot of ways, propaganda. And if you read this article, you'll know what I mean. Propaganda. Because I've got a very different view on the center of the Middle East, which is Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, a land that was stolen and hijacked by Theodore Herzl, the Rothschilds, and the Zionists to create, which is essentially a crime syndicate, an outpost, taking land from the people that were already there, who'd had their land taken by the British, being run by the Turks, because we all know this. And this whole right of return BS is nothing more than justification for uprooting people that were basically getting along and creating strife, dissension, disorder. And since 1948, there's been nothing but conflict, real deep conflict in that part of the world. So I think you have to look at this from a particular lens. But there's some interesting coincidences, and there are people, or synchronicities, and there are people who are invested in this stuff from a ritual level that really take this seriously, and they carry this stuff out. Sometimes it's real, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you feel like you're not, sometimes you don't. I'm dating myself there. So just, again, keep an open mind here. What we want to try to do is air this stuff out. We want to open up the vault door and let the light in. Let the light shine in and breathe some illumination from our end of this. But again, you've got to be rigorous. You've got to ask yourself, well, where is this coming from? What is their belief system? Do you agree with it? Do you believe in it? Do you think it is factual, speculative. This is not easy work, boys and girls. Like, there are things of this I think are interesting. There are things that I don't agree with it. But I'll shine the light on it. I'll bring it out there. I'm not going to be a slave to the fact that this is going to happen or potentially will happen. We had the blood moons last year. Everybody's thinking, oh, the blood moons, the last of the blood moons. Boy, was it going to get bloody. Some things happened. It wasn't the end of the world. And I was predicting, no, this is not the time. The time is going to be in September. That's when we're going to have some tricks coming up. Trust me. September, we'll save that for a different show. But I wasn't buying into the blood moon drama. We talked about it, though. We brought it out. We looked at it, turned it over. We pulled it apart. This is what we have to do. We put it aside. Now you know. Now you know. August 14th. Don't be scared. Don't be frightened. But just by addressing this stuff, what do? We remove its power and its spell and its grip over us. And that's where we're going to end today's show. Because there's always the potential and the opportunity to see as much as we can, to articulate it and share it amongst ourselves so that we're not isolated, so that we're not in a place where we're alone, so that we're not in the dark. And I hope that I've clearly enunciated my position on Donald Trump for the last time. And that what I really stand for are deeply organic values that allow us to live from a place inside of ourselves that is authentic and real. Okay. So, a couple things. I got some new stuff happening on my website. I've just put up an event that's taking place in the last week of September. It is a Astro Yoga event that I'll be at in Canada, just outside of Toronto. It's a weekend of astrology. We're looking at a lot of the trends for 2017, a lot of Jupiter and Libra, a lot of relationship material, a lot of empowerment for both sexes coming up through that. And it's on a really, really nice little piece of land. Very limited participation, about 15 people, very select group. And you're going to get yoga. You're going to get great organic meals. And at night, we're going to talk about the stars and the mythos of the stars, where the constellations are and all that good stuff. So that's on my website. You can check that out. And, of course, my astrology class, we just had our first one, and it was a great success. And you get the 16-hour instruction plus the webinar. Go to my website. Check it out, 11th House Academy. Okay, so you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back on Sunday nights for 11th House Radio. And here, Philip K. Dick.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu. Perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this. Such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.